Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to a Friday morning episode of Adobe Live. I am your host, Tyler Babin. I am a photographer and a director based out of New York City, and today we're going to be talking about building an online presence. We're going to go from the ground up on developing a social style that works for you, and ultimately how to get more people seeing your work, which I think at the end of the day is what we all want. So I'm really excited to dive in. Let me know where you guys are watching from, what you're up to this morning, what time it is there. It's pretty early here in New York, but I'm excited to be here and chat with you guys. A little bit more about me. Like I said, I'm a photographer and a director, but I'm also an Adobe Creative Resident this year. So if you aren't familiar with the Creative Residency, it's a really incredible program where Adobe selects a handful of artists every year and essentially sponsors them to pursue a passion project for that year. And so I am working on a handful of different things. I have a documentary series called 24 Hours With. I run a podcast called Tuesday Morning Coffee, and all kinds of things in between. We're going to dig super deep into those throughout this live stream. And then something I would really love to do is actually critique some work. So if you guys want me to take a look at your YouTube or your Instagram or things like that and give you live feedback here on the stream, feel free to drop those links in the chat, and I would be happy to kind of take a look at them. So we got Zombie Army in here. Justin, good morning. We got Jesse. Ooh, Minneapolis, but it's cold there. It's cold in New York. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of winter. We got London in the house, California. I love it. So to start out, to give you guys a little rundown on today's stream specifically, to start, we're going to go through a little presentation I put together. There's just a few slides, nothing too intense, but we're going to talk about sort of developing your brand and content pillars around the type of things you're putting out into the internet. And the reason I think this is a really important stream, and I hope you guys are going to take a lot from this, is because ultimately, obviously, social media is sort of first and foremost where a lot of work is being consumed. And so I think that having a really good structured plan as to how to actually go about scheduling content and building out a series so that it's not only you just uploading random work, but there's really a certain feel that people that your work has, so that whenever people see your work, they don't even have to know that you exactly did it. Just by the look and feel of it, they'll actually have a good idea of you being the creator behind that. So we're going to dive into the computer, kind of go over some slides. Here we go. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is very much my personal experience and the actual content I'm putting out. So you guys are going to see the real schedule and things I use to build out my own social sort of platform and the work I'm doing. So take everything kind of with a grain of salt. You don't have to do everything the way I'm doing it. I encourage that you should sort of pick and choose different things that work for you and the style of work you create to make sure that you're developing something that is both sustainable and creatively fulfilling for you. So first slide, developing your brand and content pillars. So let's dig into exactly what this means. So your brand, who you are, we're going to scroll down and take a look at sort of my personal brand outline, right? So my last name's Babin. That's generally what I go by on the internet. And these are kind of the core things I look at to make sure I'm creating with intention based off the things that make me happiest, right? So if we look here at this first slide, developing my brand, I mainly just call this things I like / am interested in to make sure that everything I'm creating is falling into these right categories. So photography and film, I like fashion, travel, music and technology, food, and minimalist lifestyle. On top of that, I have my sort of brand values and terms, which is aspirational, relatable, and transparent. And then if you kind of look over to the right of this slide, we have like my Instagram screenshot, right? And Instagram's where a lot of my priority is, being a photographer and a filmmaker. That's just a platform that works for me. But that's kind of what I want, is I'm trying to make sure that everything I create falls in line with these sections of subjects that I'm interested in, and that all the content should feel a certain way, right? So the aspirational, relatable, and transparency that I'm pushing for is really kind of the emotion I want to bring out and the things I want people aspiring to do who are consuming my content. And this is sort of I really encourage everyone to kind of like sit down with a notebook and, make lists of things that you're interested in and that values that matter to you. I think one of the pitfalls of creators getting into the digital space is that maybe you're not interested in fashion, but you think fashion content will do really well. You're not going to have your heart in it. It's going to be tough to create lots of content around a subject matter that you don't genuinely have a passionate interest around. And so I think really taking time to determine what those brand outlines are. What do you want to make, and what do you want people to feel when they're consuming that content? Once you have those two things narrowed in, you can start thinking about your content pillars. And so the way to think about this is, instead of it's sort of thinking about things in terms of buckets and different projects. So if we scroll down and take a look at my sort of content pillars, and ultimately there's 5 buckets of work that I tend to use to prioritize everything that I'm making, right? So 24 Hours With, like I mentioned, is the documentary series I'm creating, in which I spend 24 hours with different entrepreneurs and creatives and document their life. Next is cinematic vlogging style, which, if you guys are interested in cinematic vlogging style, I did 2 streams over the last month around cinematic vlogging style and how I approach creating sort of creative stories in a vlog sense. Tuesday Morning Coffee, which is my podcast series, reviews and tutorials. This might be, a review of, the new update of Premiere, or I'll do a tutorial on how to use auto reframe, which is a feature I'm sure we'll dig into. And then finally, I use algorithm boosters. And so, as much as I will always kind of stand up on the mountain and say, only focus on doing what you love, at the end of the day, sometimes you're forced to play the social media content game a little bit. And so when I say algorithm booster, I'm saying it might be a video that it's maybe not the best thing in the world for me to make. It's not something that I'm super, super excited about, but it is something that I know will do well in the space. And so I'm okay with working that type of content into the mix, as long as it's a good balance and I'm still overall happy with what I'm creating. So we're going to scroll on down. Now, once you've decided your brand outline and your content pillars, you have to figure out what platforms work the best for you. And so these 5 platforms that I have listed, which are YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Behance, and Pinterest. These are the 5 platforms that matter the most to me in my world. And again, it's because I'm very sort of like, I do a lot of like visual work. Maybe Pinterest and Behance would be higher on your list. Again, this isn't the way I'm saying everyone should prioritize the time they're spending on platforms and the content they're developing, but this is what works the best for me. So YouTube's being my primary platform. Instagram and Twitter are followed very closely behind that. And then Facebook, Behance, and Pinterest are platforms that I do stay very active on, but maybe they're not platforms I'm updating every single day. Maybe it's more like hero pieces of content that are going there. Another way to think about this whenever thinking about your pillar content is the way one piece of content can create content for all the other platforms you're working on. And so we're going to dig a little bit more into that. But first, I want to talk very quickly about the 3 C's, I think, of developing an online presence. And remember, whenever I'm saying presence, I'm saying very high level. You need to be creating content, and more than just content, I'm saying content a lot, excuse me, you need to be creating awareness around the brand you're trying to build. So whether that's a personal brand, so I go just off my name, Tyler Babin, or if it's a business specific focus, it's totally fine, but you need to make awareness. People need to know kind of who you are. And I think there's 3 really key pillars to developing that awareness. And I call them the 3 C's. But we start out with content. Obviously, you need pictures and video and written word and audio, whatever your medium of choice is. These are just a handful of photos that I grabbed quickly that I've sort of developed over the last couple of years, and you'll notice a few things. There's a pretty similar visual style across the board. They all kind of have similar attributes, and that's something that's taken a very long time to work on, but it is a visual style, and you'll see that's the first thing I have listed that I think is very important, is developing a visual style that works for you. And the only way you find a visual style that works for you is to do a massive amount of experimentation. So I see a lot of people that are starting to develop their followings and their audiences online, and they're picking one thing at the beginning, and they never are willing to change the style of work they're making. And I think that can kind of pigeonhole you in a lot of ways. And sometimes, if you just adjust a few things in the style of work you're making and the way you're distributing it, can have a really profound impact on how many eyeballs are actually getting on that work. So even though you should work to find a visual style, never lock yourself into that visual style to a point where you can no longer experiment with other types of things. And then finally, a sort of key thing that I tell myself every day is make what you want to see. So sort of sit back and imagine, like, if you hopped on Instagram or YouTube or Facebook or whatever your platform of choice is, what is something that would make you really excited to see? And I think that if you can think of that and you get a good visual in your mind, you should make it. Because if you would be excited to see that, and if that's the type of content you want to see being made in the world, I can guarantee you there's many, many other people in the world that also want to see something similar, and you'll have a good audience to go after. So that's the first C, is content, making sure you dial in what type of work you're making in that visual style. Next up is community. Again, the thing that I think really separates the I don't want to say good from bad, but the people who really are able to develop an amazing living off of being a social digital content creator is developing relationships with the people that are actually following your work. And so, making sure that you're spending just as much time engaging with people on all these platforms as you are creating the work that you're posting is really, really important. And you should dedicate a lot of time to that. So I'm constantly, even though I'm posting a lot of photos and videos everywhere, I spend tons of time in my messages and making sure that I'm getting to know the people that are dedicating time into looking into the work I'm creating. And next is make sure you're making things that spark conversation. So anytime that you're, posting an image on Instagram or Twitter, making sure that there's something in the caption to start conversations, ask questions, try and get to know people more, and create a welcoming environment. Make sure everyone's sort of happy to be a part of the community you're building, because ultimately you need to create sort of fans and followers for life that are going to follow the journey you're on. And so really big on community. Again, if you're just joining us, we're giving just kind of a brief overview on building an online awareness and presence. Again, if you guys have any questions from a social perspective on any platforms, I'm more than happy to dig into those on behance.net/live. Drop those questions into the chat and I will dig into them. So that's the second C, is community. So we have content, we have community, and then finally consistency. And so the only way to really make an impact on all these social platforms is consistency and picking a schedule and sticking to it. And so from like a personal experience, I think I have somewhere in the mid 30,000 followers on Instagram. And I would usually average, if I'm posting, my normal cadence is posting every other day on Instagram. I'll average about 3,000 or 4,000 views on my Instagram profile itself per week. That being said, for the last week, I was traveling a bunch. I've had a bunch of projects that were in the works, and that completely fell to the wayside. And all of a sudden, I look at it this morning, and there's less than 1,000 views on the actual profile, which is a pretty dramatic drop from what I'm used to. And so, being willing to stick and really have a consistent feed is going to be something that really makes a dramatic impact. As soon as you kind of fall off, the algorithms are not going to support you as much. And so getting back into the flow once you've fallen out of it can be really, really difficult. The flip side of that, and I'm always trying to kind of pull from opposite directions, is don't bleed the feed. Making sure that you're developing a good schedule, but also you have to allow people time to digest the things you're putting out. So make sure that if you want to post multiple times a day, that's fine, and I'm okay with that schedule, but giving some space, let a few hours sink in so that you're not overwhelming the algorithm, because if you start putting out too much too quickly, it can have the reverse effect and you'll actually start getting less eyeballs on your work. So those are my 3 C's and my 3 sort of core pillars of building an online presence: consistency, community, and finally content. And now on the topic of content, my final little batch of slides I want to go through is content distribution and getting the most out of one project. And so it's really important to remember that even though you're creating tons of content, you can take sort of hero pieces and really develop those in a way that they can continue feeding your content calendars and the amount of things you're trying to put out on a weekly and monthly basis. And so I want to give a little breakdown of what I think about whenever I'm creating like one video piece in particular. So content distribution. So we're starting out with our hero video, which if we look here in the center is 24 Hours with Jeff Staple. This was an episode of my documentary series. It was a hero piece. I spent multiple days filming with Jeff, and if you go over to my YouTube channel, just searching Tyler Babin on YouTube, I did a full Adobe live stream series on breaking down the post-production of this series of 24 Hours with. But it didn't end just there. This one video was able to, create dozens of pieces of content. And so sort of looking at the different options we have. So we have the YouTube video, which is the hero. That's ultimately where I want everyone to end up. But there's 2 other main pieces of content that can be sourced from this video without changing too much. So we have our hero video. Off to the left, we have the YouTube director's cut. This was an uncut version of the interview I had with Jeff during this series. And then over to the right is a podcast. And so this is just the audio of the episode. And so very quickly, I've taken one hero piece and created 2 additional pieces of content from that. If we go down to the bottom, these are the 9 different places that I can put content from this episode. So in-feed Instagram posts, Instagram stories, Instagram TV, all for Instagram. Each piece of content can have its own piece of content that it works from there. In the center, we have a Twitter quote, Twitter photo, Twitter video, and this is me. I could take, one thing that Jeff said that was interesting in our interview and just put that as a typed out quote and then follow it up with a Twitter video. And then additionally, a Behance portfolio, Pinterest long form content, and TikTok, which is an amazing platform that's really, really got a lot of energy around it. And these are, the pieces of content that I sort of look at the most. And so if you sort of, think about it, and again, you don't have to do every single one of these, but theoretically you could take one video and that could be distributed into 30 to 35 different pieces of content, and I could use a timeline of 1 to 2 months to get all of that content out. So therefore, there's constantly more energy being pushed back to the main YouTube video, and it'll continue to grow. Otherwise, YouTube has a bad algorithm of if it doesn't do great, consistently, sometimes it can fall off and those views start to drop. But continuing to push content back to that main hero video is really, really important. I saw a question from David. My thoughts on TikTok. Where is it going? Do I think I will be more active on it? I think it's tough to make a call this early on as to if TikTok will be the biggest platform ever, because at the end of the day, we still have platforms like Vine and Arrow and things like that had a real moment. They got really, really big really fast, but then all of a sudden they kind of fell off and sort of disappeared. And so will TikTok be around forever? I don't know. I do have a feeling that it is going to play a really big impact. I think it's doing a lot of very smart things, and they have a really good grip on a market that is very loyal. And and I do see myself being a lot more active on it. I've started to spend a lot of time creating content for it, but again, sort of in my priorities of where I'm placing it, it's lower down on the list, and that might be a good thing or a bad thing. But I will absolutely start being more active on TikTok and pushing a lot of energy that direction. Great. So now I'm kind of done talking, and I'll give you guys sort of a big view of everything we kind of went through. Quickly breaking this down, developing your brand and content pillars, making sure that you understand what you're interested in, the type of stuff you want to make, the values of your brand. And the important thing, I think, whenever picking out things like brand values, is it gives you a really good barometer, to determine if you are interested or not interested in a specific project that comes along. So I recently had an opportunity to work on a campaign with a big company and a big brand, but I don't feel that they were very transparent. I think there was a lot of kind of gray areas in the type of work they were doing, and I was very quickly to be able to say, no, I don't want to associate with that brand, even though it's a big company and it would have been great on my resume. I just think the long-term effects wouldn't have been where I wanted. And once you have your brand outline, deciding on content pillars, and this sort of circles back around to our content distribution, is that you can create these massive big hero pieces, and then there's tons of other content that can come off of those. And so that allows you to simplify a little bit your approach with how you're creating content, why you're creating content, and where you're putting all of the photos, videos, and written things, where you're going to put those after you've made them. Cool. So to give you guys a little idea, I also want to talk about a few different things. So making sure that anytime you're kind of developing a presence, there's consistency across platforms. So I brought up my Instagram account right here. You'll notice we go through lots of similar colors, things like that. But then also things like my bio. So I have New York City. I made videos for Gary Vee for 3 years. And now I'm a creative resident with Adobe. I'm very much branding myself as to who I used to work with, what I work with now, things of that nature. And then if we look at the consistency of the color palette and things moving over to YouTube, you'll see similar with the YouTube thumbnails, the visual styles, pretty similar. If we go over to the About, same sort of breakdown, NYC, Adobe Creative Resident, previously Creative Director for Gary Vee, and similar again over to Twitter. And this all circles back into that feeling and emotion, right? Whether someone discovers me on Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram, which are my 3 main pieces, I want to make sure that it feels similar across the board. Additionally, whenever we're talking about developing a visual style and a creative style, I just want to give a quick tip into what I use as a resource. And so I'm a really, really big fan of Pinterest. I am on it religiously. And this is a sort of breakdown of my most recent sort of saves. And I'll kind of scroll through here, and you'll probably notice there's a very similar style in the work I'm creating on all of my channels as to the work I'm saving here. And I think Pinterest is a really great tool to source images to ultimately develop an online style that works for you. And so, we could say warm color palette. We can type this in and then sort of find images that work for you if you enjoy more warmer tones. Personally, I go for a lot of very desaturated tones. So maybe I'm going to say desaturated color palette. Well, this is still pretty colorful. Let's see. Maybe go desaturated color. Desaturated photography. Cool. This is a little bit more in line with the type of visuals I like, and then I can use these as inspiration to start developing my own style. So now that we have kind of all that foundation laid, I've only got a few more minutes for this portion. We're going to be talking a lot more next week on specifically things to be able to make content on a faster basis. I'm going to show you guys how I'm actually creating my Instagram graphics and my YouTube content and all of the additional assets that come out of these things. So we'll jump over to Premiere. Again, I only have a few minutes left, but if you guys want to drop in any links for me to look at, or if you have specific questions around platforms, drop those in right now. David, I'll do my best. I think there may be a way for me to make this available, in which case I definitely will. I will, and if not, feel free to email me at babin@adobe.com, and I will feel free to send you over this deck. Perfect. So we're going to start kind of wrapping things up for today now that we've laid a lot of foundational work in terms of design and things like that. And then next week, again, we'll get a lot more into the actual gritty nature of how to actually create all this content. Anytime between now and next week, though, feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a DM on Instagram, and I'm happy to kind of explain anything around the topics. And then I've seen that there's been a couple Instagram links that have come in. So next Friday, we're going to start out by doing a whole bunch of critiques on different work. So if you guys dropped your link in, tune in with us next week, next Friday, and we'll be able to give some feedback to that work. But I'll start signing off. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you took a lot from it. I know there's a lot of information ultimately in this deck, so make sure you take some time over the next week before we start digging into the actual creation aspect of this and start answering those questions, those brand development questions, and make sure that you have your sort of content pillars in mind so that next week, whenever we dive in, we'll be able to really move quickly, and I'll get to show you guys a whole bunch of features. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, a great Friday, and I will see you next week. Peace.